sitting up in bed with a gasp. It took him a second to realize he'd been dreaming. Oliver looked at the clock next to him. 5 minutes until the alarm would go off. What day was it? Tuesday? What classes was he teaching? Oh, a nightmare. It was just a nightmare. It had been 15 years since he'd been fired from the university. In that time, he'd managed to find some lab jobs, horrible pay, worse benefits, and had finally gotten hired on with the Houston Police Department in their crime lab. It was dull, boring, lonely work. His lab partner was an old woman who reminded him of his second-grade teacher. She'd like banging her ruler on his desk to get his attention. He could never seem to do anything right as far as she was concerned, but they hadn't fired him yet, so he just kept showing up every day, following the same routine, day in and day out. It was, of course, an insult to someone of Oliver's intelligence and talents. Research, indeed. He'd been reduced from the brilliant career opportunities of academia to math-checking another's lab work. If nothing else, the angst of his life had benefited his performance skills in verissimo opera, he guessed. Small blessings. It was Oliver's one single outlet, the only thing that kept him sane. Everyone had been effusive in their accolades of his recent work as he poured his frustration and aggravation into theatrical oration. But that was not an option today. He turned off the alarm and went through his morning on autopilot as he got ready for another day of work at the crime lab. First contact. I'm not a good mediator. I'm not a good anything, really. My talents and skills are pretty limited to knowing how and when to ask questions and keeping my mouth shut, which I obviously had been failing to do lately. However, I had taken Chrissy's recommendations to heart. If I was going to have anything less than a spectacular disaster at my meeting tomorrow with Detective Lucero, I needed to know as much as I could about the lens. So I decided not to watch my favorite Nickelodeon rerun after dinner. Instead, I was going to get acquainted with the lens, which is why I was now sitting in the middle of my bed, facing the small reading lamp on the headboard. I figured if I dropped the lens in the middle of the bed, it would be relatively safe. And if I fainted or I had a heart attack, I'd be more likely to survive for the same reason, hopefully. Surrounded by the purples and golds of my patchwork quilt, I tried to sit as straight as possible in a tailor seat position, the lens in its case before me. Again, the case seemed almost to inhale as I lifted the lid off. I set the lid down beside the case on the bed and took a moment to just let my gaze rest on the lens sitting inside, firmly nestled in its red felt cocoon. Someone had gone to a lot of trouble to make this. I gently ran my index finger along the material, hearing the rasp faint of skin against the nap of felt. I closed my eyes and inhaled, hoping for an insight or some kind of instruction. Nothing so far. I nodded to myself, whoever gets that off easy in life, and gently removed the lens from the case. Again, I peered at the reading lamp through the lens opening without seeing anything more than the light coming through the interior crystal and lenses. I tried it from the reverse end with the same results. Nothing like consistency in the scientific method, right? Next, I carefully removed the glass slides in their black bracketing frame and set that down beside me. Then peered once again at my reading light through each end of the lens. No change. So noted. I set the lens down on my lap. The last thing I needed was to set it down next to me and have it roll off the bed, and picked up the glass slides. It was easy to remove them from their black frame, and they appeared to be just normal glass slides like you would see in a laboratory, except these were squares rather than long rectangles. I'd never seen glass slides before. I wondered briefly if they were a special order. I have a propensity for breaking things around me, so I've learned to be careful and consider replacement contingencies well ahead of any need. I sighed and put the slides back into their black frame and carefully returned the frame to the corresponding slot in the lens. My physical examination had netted me absolutely 0 results. Time to inquire within. I let the lens lie cupped in my hands, my forehead, forearms resting on my thighs as I closed my eyes. Center. Breathe. I could see an image of the lens in my mind as I felt it touching my skin. My palms began to tingle and I exhaled slowly until I couldn't exhale anymore, then consciously drew in a similar long, slow breath, holding it for a moment. A sudden, brilliant, white gold light flashed behind my eyelids and I exhaled in a rush. Lack of oxygen? Maybe, but doubtful. I tried to concentrate on my breathing and resettled the mental image of what I was holding. A similar, smaller, bright white gold light seemed to flash from inside the lens that I was seeing in my mind. I opened my eyes, considering. Flash from inside my head, flash from inside the lens. There seemed to be a connection here, confirming an image of what she who knows had tried to explain to me in words in the White Room dreams. Somehow, something from inside my head was going to make something happen inside the lens. I closed my eyes again and just sat there trying to pay attention to my breathing, trying not to think, trying to feel, to understand, trying not to panic, just trying to be calm. We were going to be partners, the lens and I. Somehow, I had to get over this whole fear factor. I imagined I was sitting in my sanctuary with the fireplace and windows and gold-tiled ceiling. Slowly, the tingling in my palms eased and a feeling of warmth surrounded my hands, traveling up my arms and across my torso and shoulders. It felt like I was being hugged by someone or something that was safe. I could feel tears running down my face as I swallowed and tried to keep breathing slowly and steadily. I'd had those moments before when it seemed like the divine came close, where I could hardly breathe for the sheer wonder and awe. I never lingered long in that presence, always feeling like I'm ducking out of the way of the notice of something much bigger than I, with a half-muttered apology. I rubbed each side of my face on the shoulder, took another deep breath, and said my reluctant farewell to that enveloping presence as I let my eyes drift open. Well, I will do my best, okay? I don't know what I'm doing, but I'll do my best. I don't know if I was talking to the lens or the presence that I could still feel peripherally, but I smiled at nothing in particular as I placed the lens back in its case. I didn't feel like I knew any more about the meditation than I had before it, but I felt calm, at least, and that was good enough for me. I patted the lens gently and put the lid back. I was exhausted. Time for bed. We had a big day ahead of us tomorrow.